Hi, so I'm going to be starting a new video vlog series where I'll be interviewing fellow travelers like myself that have lived unique travel experience throughout this pandemic. It's going to be called COVID Adventures, and I really hope you enjoy it. There'll be at least one video a week. And before I interview anyone else, I thought I would give you my story and let you know what happened to me. So, as some of you know, I had been traveling for a year and a half before all of this started, and I was making my way slowly towards China, where I would be working as an English teacher. And I'd finally made it to China, and I was really excited. I'd started my job, and I loved it. It was amazing. It was such a great experience to be able to teach those children. And about a month after I started my job, we had the holidays, so the Chinese New Year's, we had time off, and my dad was in Vietnam, so I decided that I would go see my dad on the second week of the time off. So I'm planning everything. Everything's nice. My first week, I'm doing all the touristy things around Beijing that I hadn't had the time to do yet, and I was really excited. And about 3 or 4 days into that first week of traveling throughout Beijing, we started hearing news of a virus. And we really didn't know what it was, but they recommended that you wear masks when you were in big crowds and things like that. But there wasn't much detail about it, and we didn't really know what was happening. And I was just like, it's just another virus, like, it'll be fine. And then really quickly, things started changing. And it's kind of like within a couple of days, China or Beijing started panicking. They closed down all of the touristic spots, and then they started testing for temperatures in the metros. And there's a lot of things changing very, very quickly. And it was very weird. It was a weird time. So my last 2 or 3 days in Beijing, I didn't really do anything because you couldn't do anything. And my dad calls me up and he says, "Hey, why don't you just bring a couple extra things than what you had planned, just in case, because we don't really know what this virus is." So I was like, okay. So the day that I'm leaving, I start packing, and I only have a carry-on, but I pack for about 5 days of clothes in there, not even, and then I pack all of my essential things. So my laptop, my camera, and everything. I managed to fit everything into my luggage, and it is jammed packed. There's literally not even another pencil that fits in there. And I make my way to the airport, there's no problem. Once I get to Vietnam, they ask me a couple of questions, like have I had a fever, had I been in contact with someone that had been sick, and I say no, because obviously no, I'd been locked up in my room for about 3 days, so I was like, no. So there's no problem there. I get to Vietnam, and I'm really excited, because now I get to travel with my dad for a week and just spend a little bit of time with him. And about 2 days later, we learned that they closed the borders to China. So now I know that, well, I'm stuck, because they closed the borders, and then a day later they stopped all flights in and out of China, so my flight is canceled. So I'm like, okay, well, now what do? I have a big decision to make, because either I wait it out in Vietnam and see how long it lasts and then head back to China when it's time. But I think that after the whole hassle of trying to even get into China in the first place to work there, I was just so tired of everything that I was like, no, I'm not going back. It's done. I'm not going back to China. So now that I knew I wasn't going back to China, I was like, well, do I keep traveling a little bit? Or the big decision and the big part was, one of my choices was to go back home. And this was a huge decision for me to take. I'd been traveling for a year and a half. This was my dream. And it was kind of like, I'd failed, but it was kind of like, I don't know how to explain it. It was very, very emotional. I cried for like a week trying to make this decision. And I finally took the decision that the best choice for me right now to be both safe and to have a proper new beginning was to go back home. So once I took that decision, I stopped crying. And everything was fine. So I started booking my things. I planned that I would arrive 2 days after my dad. So everything was going pretty well after that. And then I get to the airport, and the 2 days after my dad, I get to the airport ready to leave, finally ready to leave, because I'd accepted the fact that, one, I needed to go back home, and I was going back home, and everything was fine, and I'd let my heart break, and I was saying goodbye to my dream, and I was like, I'm ready for this, I'm ready for a new beginning, I'm ready for all of this. And I get to the airport, and the lady stops me, looks at my passport, and says, I can't let you on the flight. So I'm there, finally ready, and they tell me I cannot go back home, and I just start crying again. It was a very emotional week. So I just start crying and crying and crying and crying, and there's nothing to do. I cried for like 15 minutes straight. Basically, they wouldn't let me go back because I hadn't left China for more than 14 days. So I had to do the quarantine in Vietnam. So I stayed. I asked them, if I take a flight on the 15th day, is that okay? They guarantee me 100% that is great. 15 days you'll be able to go, no problem. I'm like, okay, perfect. So I rebook a flight for 15 days after I've left China. And so that's all great. I'm like, okay, well, now I'm gonna spend a little bit of time in Vietnam extra. I spent about a week and a little bit more than a week extra in Vietnam. And then I get to the airport the second time, and the same lady that had turned me around the first time comes and sees me and says, oh, I've been looking for you. So I kind of look at her in surprise, because in my head, I'm like, if you've been looking for me, this is not good news. You shouldn't be looking for someone. And she tells me, I may have some more bad news. I'm not actually sure I'm allowed to let you on the flight again. So at this point, I am in full-on panic mode. I'm panicking, I'm crying. As I said, this has been a very emotional thing, and I cried so much. And I call my dad in a panic. I'm like, they're not letting me go back. I don't know what's going on. And so my dad asks me, he says, can you ask them throughout this? He manages to slip a word and says, can you ask them if they can at least let you go all the way to New York, which was my destination before going to Montreal. So I start asking questions, and she says, I really don't know, because if I can make it to New York, my dad will come pick me up. That's the worst case scenario, but I have to make it to New York. So I ask her, and she says, I really don't know. I don't really understand what they're telling me on this paper. She says, I'm going to do something that I'm not supposed to do. I'm going to let you assist the call with the head office of flights and all of that. And we're going to talk to them. And she tells me basically that my English is better than hers, and she thinks I might understand something that she didn't. So we sit down, we call the main office on speakerphone, and I'm not saying a word because I'm not even allowed to be there. And the main office tells her, I don't really know what you're talking about. You'll have to call JFK, the airport in New York. And she's like, okay, that's kind of weird because you're in the main office. You should know this. But whatever, we're just going with it. So she calls JFK, and JFK tells her, you should call the main office. We don't really have the answer to that. So the lady explains to the lady in JFK the whole situation and that the main office just sent us to them and blah, blah, blah. And the lady in JFK was so nice, because she managed to find all of my information with my passport number and everything. And she said these magical words that lifted the whole weight of the world off of my shoulders. She is clear to come through. So that meant that I was allowed to take my flight and I was allowed to go home. So the lady looks at me and she's like, it's all good, you can go home. I'll let you on the flight. So she let me on the flight herself and booked me in. She booked me a seat on my own, a window seat. And it was pretty cool. She was really nice, and she did her job the best as she could. And I'm really grateful that I fell on a woman that was that nice and that comprehensive of the whole situation. And she even let me go through with bags that were clearly heavier than the carry-on limit. She could see it, but she told the lady that was booking me through, she's like, just ignore the bags. And I was like, yes. So I don't have to pay extra. I get to like go on and everything's good, and I fly home. And I think the best part in this whole story is that I hadn't told my mom that I was coming home. I wanted to surprise her. So my brother and my dad knew. and that was it, no one else. So I was really excited, and I told my mom that my backpack from China was arriving at the airport and she had to go pick it up, which is an actual thing, but I was like, that's not actually what's happening here. Because she thought I had gone back to Malaysia to relax there or whatever. And I even like set up the whole thing, sent her like pictures of me in Malaysia from like 4 months before that she hadn't seen yet. And I was just so excited. And I get to the airport and I'm sneaking around and I see her come in. So I'm sneaking around and my dad's filming this whole thing. So I might post that video a little bit later on. And when she sees me, she literally asked like, is this for real? Because she didn't believe it. And then she hugged me and we cried. And we even made like 2 ladies that were looking at the whole scene cry, which was pretty cool. So it was very awesome. So my mom wasn't actually picking up my backpack, she was picking up me. And that was a really great surprise. And then I knew that I had about a month before the virus got here and I had to buy all my essential things, including finding an apartment and buying a bed and things like that, which I did. So I have my own apartment now and I'm really happy to be home and safe, and I will see where life takes me. For the other videos, I hope that you will enjoy them, and if you have any recommendations of people, please send them my way. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you, and well, let's keep the dream alive, nomad emotion.